Hey, what's going on everyone? Welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be timing the motor, installing the water pump thermostat, and also the timing belt. Let's get to it. The first thing we'll go ahead and install is our new water pump and water pump gasket. Always make sure you replace this. This is the last place you want to have a leak, especially after all the work you did to get to this spot. Usually these gaskets have a little bit of writing on them. That writing faces out towards you, so we'll go ahead and lay that gasket in there. We'll grab the water pump and a couple of bolts. And quick note, before you go ahead and install the water pump, make sure your new water pump is completely clean all the way around the gasket area. And the same thing goes for your block. Make sure there's no debris or any scuffing or any big gashes that could go ahead and lead to leaks when you install the water pump. Now that you have the water pump and some bolts in hand, we'll go ahead and place one of the bolts in and grab a 10mm. And what we'll do is go ahead and feed the bolt through the gasket and into the block, so that way we could seat the gasket in its correct location. So now that we have that one bolt threaded, it'll make it easier to go around the rest of the water pump and thread all the bolts in while adjusting the gasket to make sure we cover all the areas. Next, we'll take a ratchet with the 10mm at the end and snug up all the bolts. Once we have the bolts hand tight, we'll break out the torque wrench, and these get tight into 10 Newton meters. This is pretty much just hand tight, but since we have the torque wrench, we'll go ahead and tighten them all up. Our next step here is going to be to install our two timing covers. Once we have both our rear timing belt covers installed, the next step is to install our thermostat, which we have here. Two quick notes when we're installing the thermostat. Number one is to make sure you install the new O-ring on the thermostat. Then we'll go ahead and install the thermostat, and you have to make sure that when you do install it, this little valve here, it's called the jiggle valve, is facing out, of course, so you don't install the thermostat backwards, and also facing up, so it has to be facing up on the block. Next, we have to install the thermostat housing. The way this seals is this section here will compress the O-ring, and that's how you'll get the seal around the thermostat. So you have to make sure that this is clean when you're installing it on the block. So let's go ahead and do that. Once we have the bolts threaded in, we'll go ahead and snug them with the ratchet. Because we're dealing with something that uses an O-ring or a gasket, we'll go ahead and torque it to spec. And this one as well is 10 Newton meters, so we'll go ahead and do that. Now it's time to install our timing components. So we'll have to get behind this pulley here. But before we do that, we're actually going to turn the pulley 45 degrees to the left, or counterclockwise. And the reason we're doing this is to bring every single cylinder down to about halfway through the block. And the reason we're doing that is because neither of our cams are in time right now. And as we turn these later, the valves are going to compress and go down into the cylinder, and we don't want them to hit a cylinder and bend. So I actually went ahead and turned this over about 90 degrees instead of the 45, just to make sure I had enough clearance. But we have to make sure we put this back to top dead center once we have the cams all timed and ready. Now that we have the pulley off, we can get started on installing our timing components, and the first one we'll start with is this roller here. And before we install it, I like to add some blue Loctite to these, all the timing components really, just to make sure we don't have any movement after we install them. So we'll do that and get that installed. Now that we have this installed and snugged the bolt up, we'll go ahead and tighten it to 45 Newton meters. Next, we'll install the new tensioner. Make sure you don't pull this out. You need this to be compressed until the last moment when we're ready to release the tension onto the belt. The tensioner bolts get 10 Newton meters. Next, we have the tensioner pivot arm. Keep in mind, this always comes with a new bolt if you get a new one, and you should always have two washers as well. One on the head side of the bolt and one on the other side facing the block. Make sure those are both in place. And again, we'll add some thread locker in there as a safe measure. And that pivot arm gets 20 Newton meters. Next, we have the tensioner roller. Keep in mind again, this one does include two washers, one up front next to the bolt head, one on the back, and we have this little piece here that's made to make sure you keep that washer on and doesn't come off during shipping. So make sure to take that off, make sure you have that washer there, and we'll add some thread locker here as well. And that tensioner roller gets 20 Newton meters as well. Now we're going to go ahead and install the cam sprocket, the securing plate, and what I think is the longest bolt on this car. First of all, we'll make sure there's no debris or anything that will stop the sprocket from seating in correctly. And now that that's clean, we'll go ahead and slide the sprocket on, slide this securing plate on. Flat edge would go on the flat edge of the camshaft. And then we'll go ahead and thread in the bolt as well. So for this cam bolt, we got to be pretty particular. So we hand tighten it to the point where the cam sprocket won't wobble, but it has to spin freely by hand. Now we'll go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Now that we have both sprockets in, we bring out the cam lock bar, and we're going to use this to time the cams. So the reason we went ahead and turned the motor over 75 degrees off of what top dead center would be was so that we can come in, place this cam lock bar here, and spin the cam over to get it into the correct timing so we can have the bar lock on both sides. So let's go ahead and do that. Now that we have the lock bar installed, these cams should be timed to each other and we should be good to go on the timing for the heads. But there is another method for checking, and we'll make sure that that's all set as well. So if we come over to the heads and we look at this here, there's a small arrow there, and that arrow is pointing at the little notch that we have on the cams. If the arrow and that notch line up, that means that cam is in time and we're all good to go. And we usually check this on the exhaust cams. We'll do the same on the other head as well, just to make sure we're good. And we're good on this head as well, so all good to go on the timing for the cams. Now that we've verified the timing with the cam lock bar and also looking at the cam caps, and we're made sure we're good to go on both those, we'll go ahead and turn the motor back to top dead center, and we'll get with installing the timing belt. I had to cut off part of the grenade pin in order to go ahead and install the timing cover, so that sucks. And we'll crank the engine over till we get that top dead center mark right where we need it. And as you can see here, they match up, so that means we're at top dead center. So the next thing we're doing here is another double check. We're going to remove this plug. This plug here covers up our crank lock pin location, so we'll go ahead and remove that. And once that's out, it'll give us access to the crank directly, and we'll install our crank lock pin, and that'll allow us to lock in the crankshaft, make sure it doesn't move, but it also allows us to check our timing. This will only go in if the engine's at top dead center. Now we'll install our crank lock pin. If this threads in smoothly, that means we're good to go and the engine is timed correctly. As you can see, that threaded in all the way, so we're good to go there. And we'll just give it a double check by trying to crank over the engine. If it doesn't spin, we're good to go. You can see here, trying to crank it over, and that's a no-go. So that means the crank lock pin is doing its job. That crank lock pin we installed on the passenger side of the block here and this cam bar are essential parts to any timing belt job. If you don't have these, don't attempt to do the timing belt. Now we'll go ahead and remove the pulley and the cover, and we'll install the timing belt. We got those off, so we'll go ahead and unpack our timing belt. I found that the easiest way to lay on the belt is to follow this process here. So we'll start down here on the crank sprocket, make sure we engage all the teeth, and then slide the belt in. Once you're in and have all the teeth engaged, go ahead and route one belt over that idler pulley and the other one over the tensioner pulley, and we'll come over here to the right side, keep tension on the belt, and go ahead and engage all the teeth on this cam sprocket here. Remember to keep tension on the belt so that way you have enough to come all the way around. We're going to route it here under the water pump. Again, remembering to keep tension so that way we don't have too much slack. Then we'll come here and push it over onto this cam sprocket. Once you have all those teeth engaged, go ahead and press the belt in, and we have the timing belt installed now. Once it's installed, I'd like to go ahead and just go all the way around to all the teeth and make sure we're not laying any teeth on teeth here. Make sure the belt is grooved in correctly. And after going all the way around here, we're good to go. Now that we have the belt installed, we'll go ahead and remove the pin out of the tensioner. Once we remove the pin, we'll go in with an 8mm into the idler roller, and we have to turn it counterclockwise 15 Newton meters. So we'll go ahead and turn that over. So there we go, that's our 15 Newton meters. The reason we do this is to remove any slack in the belt for initial startup. Once that tensioner is set, we'll come over to the two cams and tighten up the bolts to 55 Newton meters. We gotta make sure that this cam lock bar is in while we're trying to do this. Alright, so we got our engine timed and our timing belt installed, and it wasn't too bad at all. Sadly, these cars have built up a bad rep over the years of being unreliable, and honestly, unless you're pushing 30 pounds of boost to a stock block, it's really not true. As long as you stay on top of maintenance, especially big items like the timing belt, the car will take care of you. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you guys in the next one. Peace.